Good evening or late afternoon. Today is October 14th, 2025, and I like to call the study session of the Mount Diablo Unified School District Board of Education to order. The item 1.2 is the roll call. Trustee Lawrence.
Here.
Trustee Mason.
Here.
Trustee McDougall.
Here.
Trustee Mayo is here. Trustee Nzewi has a work meeting tonight and will not be joining us for the study session. Item 1.3 is our land acknowledgement. We recognize that the Mount Diablo Unified School District sits on the territory of the Confederated Villages of the Lasan, the ancestral and unceded land of the Bay Miwok and Northern Yokut, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Contra Costa County. As members of the Mount Diablo Unified School District community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we learn, but also we recognize that the land we inhabit and learn on is the ancestral land of these people who are alive and flourishing members of the Mount Diablo Unified School District and broader Bay Area communities today. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So item 2.1 is review and the approval of the agenda. May I have a motion?
I'll second that.
So we have a motion by Trustee Lawrence with a second by Trustee McDougall to approve the agenda as it's presented. All in favor, please vote. There you go. Okay, the motion to adopt the agenda is approved by a 4-0-0-1 absent vote. And that's Trustee Nzewi who is absent. Public comment. Okay. The public may address the board only regarding any item listed on the agenda. These presentations are limited to 3 minutes each or a total of 30 minutes for all speakers, or the 3-minute time limit may be shortened. If there are multiple speakers on any one subject, the public comment period may be moved to the end of the meeting. Speakers are not allowed to yield the time. And it looks like we have one speaker at this point in time, Linda Ortega. Please, Linda.
Good afternoon, President Mayo, trustees, and members of the audience. I just have one question, part two maybe, but the question that came up that I've been thinking about your budget and the $168 million in reserves. And I just want to know how are you going to ensure that you will attract and retain the highly qualified educators our students deserve and stay competitive by putting, I would hope you were going to put real salary offers on the table for the 26-27 and the 27-28 offer so that they will exceed the COLA. I mean, my members have been reaching out to me and I understand I just got some increases my own and I'm a single parent. And sometimes living in this area is it's just unaffordable. And I know sometimes we have to share our expenses with family members because their jobs are being affected as well, as my daughter has, because she works for the government. And so I just want to continue to support our newest educators. It's been stressful and they're concerned and they don't know if they should stay in this area or move on. And I do want to acknowledge the hard work that HR has done over the summer and working with Ryan Sheehy, trying to make sure that we have enough teachers in our classrooms. It's been the first year in many years I've seen fewer vacancies. I would hate to lose those people and those qualified members or teachers. So my concern is, what are we doing? What are you doing to make sure that we retain these teachers in our classrooms? Thank you.
Information from staff or feedback from members of the public. The board may also convene a retreat or discussion meeting to discuss board roles and relationships. Any such meeting, regardless of title or topic, shall be held as a regular or special meeting as appropriate and shall comply with all other requirements for a regular or special meeting. As I recall, this study session was called to inform board members and the public about the 25-26 budget and the 2 subsequent budget years. Since January 2025, the board has received information from staff about the governor's proposed budget, the May revise, and the final budget signed by the governor. During this period, input about programs was gathered from parents, staff, students, and through various advisory committees as requested by the local control funding formula, as required by the local control funding formula enacted in 2013-14. This information was used to identify future local control accountability plan programs and expenditures. At the same meeting, the LCAP and the 25-26 budget was adopted, along with the Mount Diablo SELPA annual service plan and annual budget plan. On June 25th, the board also adopted Resolution 2425-77, requiring identification and planned implementation of revenue enhancements and/or budget reductions of $2.75 million in 26-27 and an additional $2.75 million in 27-28, with the requirement that a detailed plan be submitted with the 25-26 second interim report. In July, the Contra Costa County Office of Education approved our budget as submitted with caution. Tonight's study session is an opportunity for the board to learn more about the budget from staff, to ask questions in a safe environment in accordance with the Brown Act, and to build trust among trustees. As trustees ask questions or make comments, I hope we can all agree comments and questions are intended to gather information and may not necessarily represent an opinion on a particular budget item. With that, Dr. Clark, please proceed.
Yes, Madam President, thank you. I just want to welcome the board and welcome the audience who's watching. I want to first give gratitude to staff who worked throughout the week, the fall break on this presentation. It doesn't just happen in a vacuum. There's a lot of hands that go into this. School budgets are very cumbersome and they're difficult to understand. And things like assumptions and things like that play into what we're able to do as a district with our budget. And just previously as we hear about ending fund balance, it comes off as these are dollars that are in reserves. So it's almost at the end of the month when you get your paycheck and you haven't paid your mortgage yet. Like you can't say I have X amount of dollars. You have to take out for that mortgage. And so much of our budget is encumbered, is restricted, and things of that nature. And so when we bring forward our end of year budget, or we bring forward the first interim, second interim, ending fund balance, and those things, we understand that there's lots of other items on the agenda for that evening. And so tonight, we're going to take a deep dive into our budget, and we have time to be able to do that. And we have, we're all sitting here, and hopefully it's a collaborative effort where we can not only educate the board, but we can educate the public and anyone who's here more on some of those implications on our budget that's happening either from the state, from the county, from the feds, from our own enrollment, from our compensations, things like that. I also just want to caution folks that this is not a negotiations study session. We're here to talk about the budget. But I will say, and just give good news, amongst our teachers, around 50% of them make over $100,000 in salary. And so that means that they have been with us for some time. So I think that Mount Diablo does a really good job at retaining and supporting our educators and staff along the way. So staff is a high priority for us, but our highest priority is our students. And that's who we have to make sure that we're solvent and that we can support the programs and the folks who support those people. So tonight I have with me, I have our part of our HR team. We are missing one of them, but Adrian and Gustavo are going to do a fantastic job walking us through this very complicated budget. And so I hope that you'll ask questions. I hope that this will answer some questions that may be out there. But if nothing else, everyone who listens and watches this is going to have a greater understanding of school finance than they had this morning. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adrian Vargas.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Clark. I have one correction. We're with fiscal services, not human resources. But if human resources wants to come up. So with that, I will go through the budget review and which includes quite a few slides on our budget. But today our agenda is, as Dr. Clark described, is for us to build a better understanding of the general fund financials, as well as review the components of the adopted general fund budget, because that is the budget we are working on currently. We do make adjustments throughout since after the adoption. And those will be presented at the first interim report, which happens in December. Also, we'll be reviewing the multi-year projections, as well as the assumptions, and done just the future considerations and risks to the general fund budget. And really, that's the slide that I usually put in at most of the budget reporting periods that I present, but we have a little bit more detail behind that. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Gustavo so he can just kind of talk about some highlights of the general fund.
Okay. The general fund pays for both everyday school operations and specialized state and federal programs. Unrestricted funds keep schools running, while restricted funds ensure students receive legally required and targeted support. Slide. And here's a quick acronym guide. Please feel free to reference this slide throughout today's session.
And before we move off the acronyms, we try to capture just about every acronym we used within the PowerPoint slide. We might have missed some, but I think this captures the majority of the acronyms that we do use. So again, we've talked about we're working off the adopted budget. This slide that I have is the multi-year projection. And as Board President Mayo mentioned, we did pass a resolution. At that moment, we needed to recognize that we were short and we weren't making the 3% reserve with our adopted budget. So we did the resolution that basically committed ourselves to reductions of 2.75 million beginning July 1st, 2026, and then an additional 2.75 million July 1st, 2027. This was primarily due to the fact that the County Office of Ed, FCMAT, and School Services advised districts not to budget the one-time block grant, as well as the TK additional add-on. There's slides further down the road that I will go through that and give you an updated multi-year projection, because those two proposals were approved in the state enacted budget. And then I will go through what that impact looks like. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands this is how we started 25-26. This changes. And again, you will see an updated MYP. And really that updated MYP is just adding the additional revenues. It will not be the MYP that's presented at the first interim report. And as I go through this presentation, feel free to ask me any questions as we go along. Gustavo and I are here to have that conversation. So part of it is, so it does include the two bargaining units that signed tentative agreements with us, which was CSEA and Teamsters. At the time that they signed that, we had on the table a 1% salary increase. So it does include those two particular bargaining units at 1%. Okay, so moving on, this is just a table of the adopted budget multi-year assumptions. I'm just going to point out that the COLA is 2.3% for the current year. It's projected to be 3.02 in the second year in 26-27, and then 3.42 in 27-28. Also, you'll see STRS pension rates are projected to remain flat. PERS rates, so those are for our classified employees. You do see a little bit of a jump in 26-27, and then almost a full percentage point in 27-28. And then we use the lottery amounts per ADA to project our revenues. You do see the universal TK LCFF add-on, and this is for the 12-to-1 student ratio. So this didn't include the additional TK add-on. Again, this is just a table that reflects the assumptions used in generating the revenues for the 25-26 year. Just keep in mind that the additional TK add-on that is not included in this table equates to about $2,397 in additional dollars per ADA. And then moving on to the next slide, I included this slide just to show you the COLA projection history. And primarily you can see just for 25-26, when you look at the governor's proposal that he puts out in January of the 24-25 year, he was projecting, or his administration was projecting, a 2.73%. You move through the May revise, the enacted budget, the first interim, and then you look at the governor's proposal in January of this year, and we were looking at 2.43%, which was a different, it was basically lower, but as you can see with the May revise and the state enacted budget, we fall to 2.3. So we were at one point at 2.93, which was reflected in one of our interims while we were going through the 24-25 fiscal year. And then we ended up with a 2.3%. You can see in 26-27, those COLAs seem pretty consistent, but you could see that we were looking at a projected COLA of 3.52%, and it dropped by 0.5% from the governor's proposal to the state enacted budget. And then you see a little bit of a decrease in the third year out. And again, this is just a table just kind of reflecting the things that fluctuate a multi-year projection for a school district. Any questions on that one? So moving on to the student enrollment assumptions. So I gave you the 3 prior years to the 25-26 projections. So you can see that we are projecting a little bit over 29,511 students. That does include a projection of 15 students for County Office of Ed students. So for us outside of the county, it would be 29,496. The ADA is calculated at a 93% ADA enrollment yield. And you can see that was primarily based off the 2 prior years. So we are projecting a 93% ADA ratio in the current year, and then the 2 out years. The funded ADA should be that calculation, because based off the LCFF calculator, we are projecting to be funded off the current year. And then moving down to the unduplicated pupil count, we did see an increase last year, which raised our single year, where the prior year we were at a little bit over 47% to almost 56%. And so once you go over 55%, you start generating concentration dollars. So we're not there yet, because the LCAP supplemental concentration is based off a 3-year rolling average. So we were projecting a single year of 55.8, which would raise us to a rolling average of 53%. And again, since I've been here, we've been using the flat enrollment in the out years, just because we've seen growth. And so we are in the last year of our TK add-on. So we should start seeing, once we get our new demographic study completed in the next month or 2, we should see some dips in our enrollment, because the TK growth ends in 25-26. But Mount Diablo has benefited from the TK growth year over year. And then this is just the graphical description of the information that was on the table in the previous slide. So now I'm going to move into breaking down the components of our budget. And I'm going to start with the revenues on the unrestricted side, and then move on to the restricted revenues. What you could do is reference slide 5. All these numbers should tie back to the multi-year projections for the budget year of 25-26. So when you look at the LCFF and the revenue that we have in that multi-year, it should equate to $353.2 million. The state programs or state revenues on the unrestricted side should equate to 11.5, and that's the breakout of those revenues. And then you move on to the local programs. You can see that we generate quite a bit of interest income, and that is at almost $6.5 million. And then moving over to the restricted revenues, those are broken out by federal, state, and local. And then you can see the breakout of each. As you can see in the federal side of restricted revenues, the majority of those revenues are related to title programs or our federal special ed funding sources.
So
And-
I do have a question,
Sure.
and I apologize for not submitting it earlier. Um, Where do where does the income and the expense for adult education and food services fall into your presentation?
So as part of the agenda, I focused on the general fund.
Okay,
So we don't have that throughout any of the 40 plus slides. All the slides are going to be reflective of the general fund financials. But to answer your question, the adult ed funds are tracked separately, and then the cafeteria funds are tracked separately in their own respective funds.
thank you.
So moving on to the state program revenues, again, you can see that the majority of those revenues are related to our special ed funding sources. Second would be our ELOP and ACES program. Those are two different funding streams, but the majority of that 15 plus million is related to our ELOP. ACES probably is in the range of a little bit over $3.5 million, and then the rest would be ELOP. And then the STRS on behalf, that is just revenue that we need to reflect on our financials. I have talked about this previously. There is an offsetting this is the revenue. There's an offsetting expenditure that would balance that STRS on behalf, but that is just something we're required to run through our financials. It's in and out. It has no sort, like we're not spending extra dollars on STRS benefits. It's just something we're reflecting. I'm sure I could go through the calculator we use, but I mean it's basically just taking a file and it generates the information for us. And then moving on to local programs, these are either local grants or local donations, and then those are the breakouts of the majority of those funds. And again, the totals, if you reflect back to the slide number 5, those should reflect the revenues. So moving on, I'm going to move on to unrestricted salaries. And so this slide reflects the certificated salaries and classified, and the two main funding sources within the unrestricted. I would say that the LCFF base does include our transportation expenditures because we are contributing funds to that. Yeah, we generate additional funds on top of that, but it's really considered LCFF base. And then you see our LCFF supplemental, which is those funds generated by particular student groups. And so when you look at the unrestricted certificated salaries, if you look at the description, you can see that the majority of what we spend of our LCFF base goes towards instruction. And then moving on to unrestricted classified salaries. Again, this is just the breakout between base and supplemental and the particular service that they support. And as I stated previously, you will see pupil transportation sitting under LCFF base. And so, again, when I was putting together the PowerPoint, I just felt like this is probably one of the better ways because you don't see this information when we present the financials during the reporting periods, just so you can see the differences like, you know, attendance and social work services, guidance and counseling services. I think we all generally understand that a majority of our expenditures go to instruction because that's why we're here. And then when you look at the classified salaries, you know, these are salaries that support teaching and learning. And so when you see data processing services, that's our IT department. When you see operations and maintenance, I mean, that they're doing the facility upkeep. When you do look at, you know, other general administration, that's fiscal services, that's human resources. That's usually your centralized support systems. So before I move on to the next slide, any questions on this? Okay, so continuing on the salaries, this is on the restricted side of the budget. And so again, this just has the description of the types of services that each of these budgets are supporting within each of these respective programs. And then you see them broken out. For example, ELOP is our Expanded Learning Opportunities Program. I think most people know Title I, Special Ed. Carl Perkins is one of our CTE grants. And then Title II, Title IV, and Title III, and then our other federal programs. And then this is just a second slide continuing the categoricals or restricted programs, which the EEBG is the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant. I don't remember this CCSPP. I think it's the Community Schools grant. And then CTIG is another CTE. The Arts, Music, and Instructional Materials Block Grant is the next one. And then Prop 28, and so on and so on. And then you do see the LREBG, which is the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant. And again, when you add those two slides, that 48.6 million does tie back to the restricted certificated salaries. So I'm going to turn it over to Gustavo so he can give me a little bit of a break, and you'll go through the classified salaries.
Okay. So this slide details the classified salaries funded by restricted funds, and totals just under 32.7 million, which is the figure shown on slide 5 as well. You have your functions on the left-hand side, and then the funding source at the top. Our unrestricted benefits total about 91 million. The large share is health, dental, and vision coverage, which represents 43% of total benefits. The pension contribution continues to be a major cost driver, totaling 38 million combined for both STIRS and PERS. The restricted benefits total 59.9 million. And again, this is a breakdown of all the funding restricted resources in STIRS, PERS, Medicare, Social Security, health, dental, and vision, unemployment, workers' comp, OPEB, and other benefits. Here's the unrestricted budget for books and supplies at about 5.6 million. The key spending areas include instruction and school operations. And the restricted books and supplies total 10.8 million, which is nearly double the unrestricted side. And now I'll turn it back to Adrian. Cumulatively are about 425 million.
I don't have that number off the top of my head. I'd have to go back to slide 5, but I mean, we're on the unrestricted side, we're roughly above, I think we're close to 92%. But Gustavo's adding that up as we speak.
423,698
million.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's, yeah.
And so to put that in perspective, a 1% raise is $4.25 million across all.
Well, or I do have a slide that actually gives us the dollar amount, because when we calculate the salary increase, we're calculating what is in positions. Whereas when you take total salaries, that includes substitute cost, overtime cost, extra duty, stipends that, teachers might receive, or for doing extracurricular type of things, like I'm thinking department chairs, or coaches. So when you look at that number, it includes all of that, because that number is, without being on the slide, I want to say on the unrestricted side, it's roughly like 2.9 million. And the restricted side's like 350 or 360,000. So we're looking at like 3.4, if I remember right. So I wouldn't say it's 4.2 million. Yeah. And then the other thing, that's right. Did you calculate salaries and benefits? Yeah. And then also, if we're including benefits, we're including the health and welfare, which is health, dental, and vision, and we don't calculate that as part of the 1%. And then before I move off the restricted books and supplies, I do want to point out that the lottery funding source does have a budget set aside of 4.6 million, and all of that usually goes towards textbooks or a textbook adoption. So when you do look at that on the restricted side, almost 50% of that is related to the lottery budget. So moving on, I'm going to move on to unrestricted contracted services and operating expenditures. And this one, I did what I came up with two ways. I do watch food shows, so I was thinking, two ways when they cook things differently. Thanks for laughing at my joke. So what we have here in the first table, again, this is broken out by LCFF base and then our LCAP supplemental, and the types of services that the budget is going towards. And so that gives you the detail, like I'll point out operations is 10.5 million. But if you look to the table to the right, the majority of that is related to utilities. So on the right side, the table breaks it out by contracted services and how much is going towards that, as well as what goes towards software. Again, I'm pointing out our insurance, and then our utilities, and then just rentals, leases. And so you see the breakout of those expenditures when it comes to contracted services and other operating expenditures. And so moving on, let's see, moving on to the next slide. I was trying to take a page from Trustee Lawrence and not print out my PowerPoint. So I'm trying to catch up. So this next slide shows, the restricted side of the budget for contracted services and other operating expenditures by funding source. And again, to the services that it is supporting.
Can you talk a little how this is grown over time, and maybe how some of the one-time funding impacted some of the decisions behind doing contracted services versus full-time employees? Could you give a little just context to these numbers?
So I guess what I would say, because we don't have a lot of, if we look at the restricted side of the budget, there's not a lot of one-time funds left. And so when I look at this particular slide, I'm looking at the arts, music, and instructional materials block grant. And we are down to the last part of that one-time funding. And that 1.45 million that you see there is a budget to account for our self-assessment, which is related to AB 218 or SAM cases or the sexual and molestation assembly bill. And that's a budget set aside to pay for the invoice that we will probably receive in May, and we have no idea what that amount's going to be. And other than that, a lot of, I would say on this particular slide, all of those programs are ongoing funding programs. When I think about ELOP has grown over the last 2-3 years. So you can see that, a lot of that is related to our vendors that are providing those services at our school sites. And then the big driver for contracted services is on the special ed side. And you can see that number for non-public agencies is at 23.3 million. So when I look at this particular slide and the 47.5 million that is showing, half of it is related to MPAs or non-public agencies. And so it's hard for me to answer that particular question just because we've gone through all of the ESSER funds and there's not too many remaining one-time block grants from the state. So I'll move on to the next slide. Well, this is not working out for me. I forgot. So this slide basically breaks out the previous slide, but it just shows where those things or where those items are going in terms of contracted services and the different categories that we track in terms of the budgets. So again, the previous slide is what it supports and the type of service it supports. And then the next slide is the breakout in terms of, contracted services, insurance, utilities, rentals and leases. But again, you can see on the restricted side, the majority of our budget is going towards contracted services.
Adrian, I appreciate you sharing that because I think to some folks looking from the outside, they may think contracted services are things that are frivolous or things of that nature, that we have fluff in there and we have life coaches and things like that. That's not what it's here. I mean, it's the non-public schools, which could be anywhere from $40,000 up to $200,000, depending on what those needs are and things like that. And so I wish, there was a better term than that, because the narrative can then be, you're using all these contractors to do the work of folks, but it's very specialized work that we have to contract out for.
So before I move, are there any other questions or?
Here we're looking at the capital outlay and indirect costs for both unrestricted and restricted resources. The indirect cost transfer is about 9.3 million, and this covers administrative overhead for federal and state grants. The contribution to restricted programs amounts to 90.9 million. Over 73 million goes to special education to ensure services remain fully staffed and compliant. 16 million supports routine restricted maintenance, and just over 1 million supports local programs such as athletics.
So I had a question here. I recall in prior years, we used to make a contribution to ROTC. Is that accounted differently, or is that no longer necessary?
There is still a contribution to, yeah. Mhm. And this slide summarizes the expenditure budget by funding source. These amounts would tie back to slide 5. On the left, you'll see the unrestricted expenditures of 306.1 million. And on the right, you'll see the restricted expenditures of 208.8 million, totaling the 515 million on slide 5.
So before moving off this slide, again, this is just I think the biggest thing about this is just, again, showing the different funding sources and the budgets that are aligned on the expenditure side, again, by the funding source. So before I go into the multi-year, are there any questions? Okay. So you have one?
Media. That is, I know we trended down. Do we feel like currently, how concerned are we about achieving 50% this year based on early trends?
So P1 is going to be worked on during the month of December, and so that is usually that's the indicator where we start looking at the first 5 months of school. I don't have that trend for you because it's a great question, because I thought about that, and I think right now our focus is on our CBEDS enrollment. So CBEDS enrollment falls on the first Wednesday of October. And so the first Wednesday of October this year was October 1st. And so we are working on our enrollment. We're trying to clean up our student information system to make sure that we have everybody that we are supposed to have on our enrollment sheets are in the system. And so that is the focus. And so enrollment goes first, and then, we do monitor the trend in terms of students coming to school, but we in the financial office will pull that data with the first P1 report. And then we will see what the trend is in terms of meeting that 93% and making the necessary adjustments if necessary for the second interim report, which is where that's basically where your LCFF is generated off of. It's generated off your P2, which usually occurs after the 8th month of school. And so you're talking like April, May. So we'll use the P1 to see what the trend is, and then we'll make the adjustment within the second interim report.
If I may, with our site principals, we basically have our system set up to collect 4 pieces of data every month. And that is, number 1 is STAR. So we're looking at ELA. We're also looking at mathematics. We're looking at suspension rates, and we're looking at attendance rates. So at our individual schools, our principals are monitoring that every single month, and then working with our administrators here to put those numbers together so we can see where we're going above, where we are falling below, and where we need to put some extra support and resources to try to work on those numbers. Gregory Gardens is very transparent and public with their efforts around around attendance. And so that would be a school that if you look at their social media and things like that, you will see the types of campaigns that are taking place throughout the district.
Okay, so moving into multi-year projections, just as a reminder, we do work under the AB 2756, which basically requires school districts to submit multi-year projections. And within those multi-year projections, of course, we are disclosing deficit spending. We do show our reserves, which is the components of ending fund balance, or what our fund balance is in the first year, the second year, and the third year. Within the third year, a district of our size with our ADA is supposed to at least maintain a 3% reserve. So again, I go back to our adopted budget. We didn't make that because we didn't include those two proposals that subsequently got enacted, or they were enacted with the state budget. But we did the resolution to show the county, and that's why we got the approval with caution. Again, based off the information that we have at the moment, and if we were presenting first interim in the next 2 weeks, we would be showing a positive certification with the information that we have. Again, things could change between now and December because we are not presenting it in 2 weeks, but I'm just giving you a point in time.
So if I could just jump in, earlier there was a comment that we have $160 million in reserves. And so as I'm doing my math, we have close to a $500 million budget. And if we had $160 million in reserves, we definitely could hit the 3% that we're required to have. And Adrian's just sharing that we didn't hit that number and we had to put forward a special resolution. So again, I mean, this is why like talking about this stuff really, really helps in gaining an understanding of knowing where all of our dollars are, and that it's not money that we have extra in reserves to do with whatever we want. And again, we're required to keep that 3% so that if all heck breaks loose, we can make payroll for a month. That's really what it's for. And so I wish we had $160 million in reserves, but we don't.
So that leads into the second point, which is the county oversight. And as I stated, they review our budgets, they review our interim reports. When it comes to the adopted budget, they're either approving it or disapproving it. When it comes to the interim reports of first and second interim, they're either concurring with the district self-certification of positive or a negative budget, or what's the third one? Qualified. Thank you. I mean, I'm striving for positive, so I get lost on the other two. But and then also as part of AB 2756, or just the multi-year projections, it just gives a district a early warning. Like it tells us where we might be. And again, we are using assumptions that we have in the moment that we're building the multi-year projections. And as I showed that slide on the COLA changed from 2.93 of a high this year to 2.30. And that does generate less revenue. And again, just keep in mind that when you see a COLA change, not only does it affect the first year, it's going to affect the out years because you can't build on a higher COLA. So it does have multi-year impacts. And so again, I will just reiterate, we multi-year projections, it's not a crystal ball. I wish it was, but it's not. It's just, again, it's our snapshot of what we think the district's going to look like in the current year and the 2 subsequent years, with the assumptions that we are using in terms of generating our revenues and expenditures. And so with that, these slides that I included in here I copied them over from the adopted budget. I talked about it earlier. Our enrollment for our district, we use 29,496. Again, that other enrollment number included 15 students projected for County Office of Ed programs, 93% over the next 2 years. We use the COLA of 3.02 and 3.42, and those are the projected increases year over year for the 2 out years. And then we are assuming unduplicated pupil percentage of 55.8% in this year and the 2 subsequent years. And then for federal, state, and local revenues, we're projecting to be flat in the 2 subsequent years. We did make an adjustment for interest income just because we don't know what interest rates would be. And if you're following the news, it's changing, and it's going to change again in December. So I used 2 million as the decline in the revenue just to be on the safe side. And then we are building some revenue increases or just increases to our special ed contribution of about 3.3 million and 3.5 million in each of the 2 subsequent years. And then moving on our salary adjustments, we do use 1.56% step and column for certificate and classified salaries. And then on our restricted side of the budget, we do see some increases due to special ed staffing growth, but that is offset when we remove one-time or expiring funds that do have salaries in them. I talked about the benefits. STRS is remaining steady at 19.1%. You see the increases for PERS. We do have overall benefit increases of 4.1 million and 5 million in the last year. And a good majority of that is for our medical increases, which is about we're accounting for about an 8% increase. And just as a reminder, when we just finished open enrollment for January 1st, 2026, and we saw an increase of a little over 5% for our Kaiser rates. Our books and supplies in the out years, they're adjusted for the removal of carryover funds or one-time expiring funds. And then moving into contracted services, again, there's that 1.45 million. In the current year, I'm using one-time funds to help offset that. But in the out years, I increased the unrestricted budget by that amount to help offset any potential self-liability insurance assessments related to AB 218. And then on the restricted side, the majority of those changes are related to removing one-time expenditures in the 2 out years. And again, this is just a rehash of what I presented with the adopted budget back in June. Again, when we come at first interim, we'll be updating these assumptions because the numbers will change. We were just here in September and we talked about unaudited actuals. And so part of unaudited actuals involves, now we know what our carryover funds are, most importantly for our restricted funds, because we don't carry over unrestricted funds. That just kind of falls to ending fund balance, but there wasn't much to fall because our deficit spend was pretty close to what was projected on the unrestricted side of the budget. So before I move on to the slide where I include the state enacted proposals, is there any questions on the multi-year assumptions? Okay, so moving on, as I said earlier, here's the slide with the 2 new funding sources. And so what you see in the yellow, or hopefully you can see on your screens, but what it reflects is a rough estimate of $2.7 million for the TK add-on. And so, as I stated, with our CBED's numbers, we're looking at our TK enrollment of roughly a little over 1,300 students. So if you take that, and I'm being very conservative at an 85% ADA ratio, just to, again, build in some cushion to what we might see, and you multiply that by $2,397 per ADA, you're looking at roughly 2.7 million. And again, that will change based off real numbers. But that's the estimate I'm using, and those are the assumptions I'm using to generate that 2.7 million. The big difference that I didn't include as part of our budget update that I did in August is the one-time block grant came in on the restricted side of the budget. When we were being, when that proposal was being discussed, when we were developing the budget in May and in June, they were talking about it being discretionary. So basically open to any use, which it still is. We can use it for any operational use, but it's coming in on the restricted side of the budget. So that is a little different. What that requires is that some of the things that I thought we could cover on the unrestricted side, we're going to have to move to the restricted side of the budget. And sticking on this slide, you can see that we've taken out the projected reductions. So that is gone. If you go down to the components of ending fund balance, where you see revolving stores, prepaids, reserve for economic uncertainty, restricted programs, and then you see other assignments. Those assignments is strictly the deficit amounts for 26-27 and then 27-28. So that 40+ million is basically us just saying, like, it's that fund balance is going to get eaten up by that projected deficit in the second year and the third year. But again, I put this slide in there just to reflect that right now we're not showing that the need for reductions to maintain a 3% reserve in the third year out. Also, with this information, you will see the unappropriated fund balance at 19.1 million. But again, the reason why you see a 19+ million in unappropriated is because I also removed the other assignments that were part of the adopted budget, which is on this slide. So when we adopted the budget, we set aside a collective bargaining contingency of 14.7 million. And really what that reflected is what at the time was the proposal on the table of 1%, with the exception of Teamsters and CSEA. So that was a set aside we put as part of the components of ending fund balance. Also, I've been talking about our ERP conversion, or basically moving to a new financial software system. And we set aside 1.45 million. And then we set aside legal settlements, and that was related to our Title IX settlement. So those commitments, or those assignments are not reflective in that MYP. And so that's why you see the 19+ million in the unappropriated fund balance. One, because we are not done with negotiations with all of our bargaining units. And then also the intent is to cover the ERP conversion with the one-time block grant, and then the legal settlements related to Title IX. If you read the Friday letter a couple of weeks ago, we are in the process of issuing out new COPs to support our facilities projects, and of those projects would be those projects related to the Title IX settlement. So with that happening, we would not need to earmark general fund dollars, because as the district did in 2018 with the COPs, we would be using Measure A funds to support those projects just like we did in 2018.
based on the 1%.
Right.
How we arrived at that.
So basically we, at the time that we put the budget together in May, June, or when we were finalizing the budget to present to the board, the first board meeting or the public hearing, this is what we had on the table to our bargaining units. And so that equates, that was the 1% for all the bargaining units for an ongoing salary across 3 years. So that's the accumulation, because when you, and you will see it on a subsequent slide, when you give a raise in 1 year and it's ongoing, the impact is, so for every dollar that you give in the current year, it's going to cost you $3 in a multi-year. So that's the reflection of a multi-year ongoing salary increase of 1% for the remaining bargaining units. Because when you run it through, it's going to take the fund balance out of every year. So once you hit it, it will lower your fund balance. And so that's why it's reflected in each of the single years. And I mean, the same can be true with the legal settlement. If, we are doing what we need to do in order to be in compliance with the Title IX settlement, we spent the $3 million one time. It's going to take the 3 million out, but we have to reflect it in the out years. Any other questions on the components of ending fund balance?
During the negotiations process, we also indicated we could provide full benefits for the 2 years. Where would that be?
So in terms of the health and welfare, as I talked about with the multi-year assumptions, we've built in roughly an 8% increase in the second year and the third year. So it's within the multi-year projections. And so if it's anything above that, then of course that would change. But, and even that is like, I mean, it's hard to equate what something might look like. And so 8% is a lot better to be in there. And we had a 5% increase this year. And we have something built in for the ongoing increase for that particular item. And so before I move on to the next slide is going to detail the restricted categorical balances. And again, before Gustavo gets into that slide, this is the part that's related to restricted programs that have different uses for it. And we also have another slide that kind of outlines what are one-time funds and what are ongoing funds. But even with ongoing funds, the biggest one being the ELOT program, we do have a large carryover in that. But when you do have carryover, you can only spend it once. And so, we are looking to make sure that when we do spend that, we are spending it on one-time investments. But that goes for any restricted categorical. If you have a fund balance or you have a balance going into the next year, you're only going to be able to spend that once. Or if you have a plan, you can spend it over a multi-year period. So with that, I'll let Gustavo explain or talk about the restricted fund balance.
Okay. So this table details our restricted fund balance. At unaudited actuals, the restricted resources closed at 69.6 million. After the budget adoption, the 2 new block grants were added. The 1.4 for the additional learning recovery emergency block grant and 8.5 million for the Student Support and Professional Development Discretionary Block Grant. So that adjusted the 25-26 budget total to 61.3 million.
If we go back to slide 30 and 31, you can see that 61.3 million or 61.4 million ties back out, where you see restricted categorical balances on that components of ending fund balance. And then it's a little harder to read on that one, but it's 61 million on the 3-year multi-year. And again, just to talk about the restricted fund balance detail slide, that difference between the unaudited actuals ending balance and the balance for the adopted budget, if you take the difference between those two, that's how much we're spending of the carryover in the current 25-26 budget. So if you look at ELOP, we are spending an additional 5+ million on top of the allocation. So we are spending down the fund balance. Or the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, we're spending, was that 7.2 million of that remaining fund balance. So here's a slide I usually include at the end of my presentation, but we still have about 10 more slides. So this is not the end of my presentation. So basically we have the state budget, we have the expiring and spending down of one-time funds, we have our collective bargaining. As Trustee Lawrence asked me about enrollment and student absence rates, that's a driver, and then our rising cost pressures. So moving into state and federal policies, we're looking at funding proposals that are on the table right now. One of them is a 26% cut to Title I. Again, that's being proposed, but just keep this in mind that our projected revenue for Title I is 6.3 million. So that 26% cut would mean 1.6 million to Mount Diablo. And this would affect the 25-26 year if that was something that got passed. We're also looking at the elimination of Title II, Title III funding. For Title II, our projected revenue is 944,000. And then for Title III, our projected revenue within the current budget is 787,000. So if that is part of the final federal budget, you're looking at, an additional like 1.6, 1.7 million. And we have budgets aligned to these revenues. And so if that goes away, we need to find different funding sources to cover those items or those expenditures within those budgets. And then related to special ed, they're proposing 15.5 billion. It is up, but we don't know how it's coming. And again, this slide is just more about the uncertainty that is coming from the federal government. And we've talked about, the different things that have happened to school districts in California. I remember talking about it the August budget update, and remember talking about it when we did the adoption in June. So I'm sure I'll be talking about it again in December. And then, as I talked about earlier, just spending down expiring and carryover funds. And so expiring is the funds that are related to one-time funds. Carryover is primarily related to ongoing funding sources and just the unused balances or budget balances being carried over into the next fiscal year. Again, these are the programs on the left that are one-time in nature. And then the programs on the right are our ongoing fund programs. And all of these make up that restricted fund balance slide that we showed, with the exception of the additional learning recovery block grant that we will receive this year, and the new professional student support and professional development discretionary block grant. And again, I will emphasize that one-time block grant, when you see the word discretionary, that basically tells you it's free to, you can use it for just about anything. They do have some things to focus on, but I guarantee you that most districts, they're going to be using that to stave off any reductions that they may have to do. So moving into bargaining, here is the breakout of the 1% cost on the unrestricted side, and then the 1% cost on the restricted side. When you look at what we have on the table right now, we have a 2.3% ongoing salary proposal. That is roughly 6.3 million for the unrestricted. We do include our special ed resources because we do contribute to that program. And so just to be on the conservative side, we do include that on the unrestricted, because if we see special ed salary increases, more than likely it's going to increase our contribution pretty close to that amount. And then when you look at the restricted balances, or on the restricted side, the assumption is that those programs, to make up for a potential ongoing salary increase, we're projecting almost 700,000, that they would have to balance that out within their program or their revenue sources. So when you look at the scenario that we currently have on the table, and you take into consideration the two funding sources that weren't part of the adopted budget, you can see the impact on a year-over-year basis. Again, if it's an ongoing salary increase, once you do it in the first year, then it's going to go across in the second year and the third year, and you can see how that flows through on the unrestricted side as well as the restricted. And again, I have this broken out by singling out CSEA and Teamsters because they already have 1% built into the adopted budget. And then when you look further down and it says 25-26 budget adjustments, that's basically those programs that need to make adjustments within their funding source or their revenue source. And then, so moving on to components of ending fund balance. Again, this is just reflecting that all we have within the previous slide is assignments related to the deficit spend. But if you include salary increases or salary and the associated benefit increases, those projected deficits will increase in 26-27 and 27-28. And I will say on slide 36, or the 1% calculations, those were recalculated using our reports as of September 1st. Well, it's more updated because the 14.7 million, that was calculated back in the spring. And so that, because you can see there's a variance. So moving on to the other consideration or risk to our budget is the enrollment trend. as I stated earlier, we had our CBEDS enrollment, our census day, October 1st. And so if you look at what our enrollment, and this is not the final enrollment, the certification is completed in December. And then there usually is another window to do corrections, and you have another certification in January, but the number in December is usually pretty strong. But if we were to take that number, our enrollment is lower than what we that we used at the adoption, as well as our unduplicated pupil count. We're pretty close at 55.6. But if I were to, which I did, I've put these numbers at a 93%, that 55.6, and compared what the projected revenues would be for LCFF if this was our enrollment. That's the impact of the revenues that is not sitting in any of the scenarios I've given you in relation to the multi-year. And so when I think about, seeing 1.5 million drop in LCFF, and again, this could change based off the trend data from P1. Like we might be at 93.3 like we were last year, but we could be at 92.8 as well. But if you just take what is in the moment, we are looking at loss of revenue of 1.5 million in the first year, almost 2 million in the second, and then a little bit over 2 million in the third year out. And so when I look at these things, I do think about, my assumption I'm using on the TK add-on, I'm at 85%. So there's a little cushion there. I think about the interest revenue where I took it down in the second year and the third year out. So if it's higher, it's going to help offset some of these numbers in the out years. So again, we work off of what we know, and we'll continue to monitor that information and make our best assumption when it comes to second interim. We might have some better data as we get closer to first interim, but usually the target is second interim. And then lastly is just the cost pressures. And here it just talks about the pension rate increases, and really a lot of that, all of it is related to PERS increases. There's the health benefits. And then the big one is insurance premiums related to AB 218. And again, that may not even be enough because all districts are seeing in terms of their insurance premiums and these assessments or the backcasting that they are doing. Just to give an example or a reminder, our self-backcasting or self-assessments that we received the first couple of years, I want to say it was about $1 million. And then this last one was 2.5 million. And again, we don't know this number until we actually get what they call projected invoice in May, and then they'll send it to you in June with their final number.
One of the questions I get asked for salary, and so you've got the 12 to 14 million, but if you just add these up, you got roughly like 8.5 million in fixed costs for the next year out of that 12 million. Calculating it correctly.
I would say you're thinking about that the right way without confirming the exact numbers, but yes, I mean, the COLA does not cover all of the increased costs that a district would or incurs year over year.
And we don't receive COLA.
Correct.
Okay. Here's our budget calendar timeline. Today we held our budget study session. In 2 weeks, we'll be having our external auditors. We'll begin auditing our unaudited actuals. The fiscal team is gearing up for first interim that will be reported in December. And in January, the governor releases the 26-27 budget proposal, which will guide us um, in our next year's projections.
I just wanted to say, for all the hard work to put this together. This was especially helpful for me, who was not here for much of what occurred during this year. But I also think it's just great for the public to see that how we're operating with the spirit of transparency, opening things up. And I think that in my involvement with NBUSD, this has been by far the most easy to understand and follow budget sessions. And so I just want to commend all the work that's been done.
Thank you. Well, and I guess my parting comment would be this was good to put together. I mean, because we really got into the details. But I also think, we do have a budget advisory committee meeting coming up, which, this is part of the work that we'll be doing with that committee as well. So we'll be sharing it with them, but also just, front loading the information that we do have so we can, get more questions and, answer anything that anyone has on the budget advisory committee meeting. So this was helpful. It just, got us going a couple of weeks earlier. So thank you.
Just say, it's not a question, just a comment. I hate budgets. I like people. And when you read between the lines, we're very intentional about the programs we bring, because not all programs don't include other costs, but we're bringing in programs and people that are going to get our kids where they need to be. And that does cost money. And I guess the other thing I would say is, I know that our teachers are frustrated, but I always check to see just where we are with the rest of the country. And right now, California teachers are #1 in pay over all the other 50 states. And to hear Dr. Clark say a good part of them are at the top of that makes me feel good that I know they're frustrated, because everybody is with everything costing more, but we're doing our best to do right by everybody that works here in order to get our kids where they need to be. So there's kind of like not a lot of good news in it, but I see in it that we're doing good things. The kids are coming back. Our programs are strong, and we'll just keep plodding along and wait for the next hatchet to come down on us.
Well, if there are no further comments, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. The study session, I should say.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.